This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Kicking off today's show is Ed Brokesh, K-State Assistant Professor in the Department of Agricultural and Biological Engineering, as he shares details about roadway incidents between agricultural equipment and passenger vehicles. The 2025 Alumni Fellow for K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine, Ron Marler, continues the show as he talks about his history in the industry and what he has learned as he advanced. K-State Extension Horticulture Specialist Cynthia Domenghini ends the show discussing evaluating storm-damaged trees and removing tree suckers. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Thursday show talking about ag equipment on the road with K-State Assistant Professor in the Department of Agricultural and Biological Engineering, Ed Brokesh. Ed, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Ed, as we begin May today, important to really think about ag equipment safety, and why is that?
Well, it's because farmers are in the field, and between now and October, we have a rise in crashes between personal vehicles and agricultural equipment. And unfortunately for personal vehicles, when they have a collision with agricultural equipment, the personal vehicle comes out, or the smaller vehicle comes out on the worst end of it, and it often results in an injury or, unfortunately, many times a fatality.
What month has the highest percent?
October has probably the highest percent, as you can imagine. It's a lot busier time, shorter daytime, though daylight doesn't seem to have an impact on the number of accidents or the time of day that they happen. The accidents in general, as you look across the data that we've been looking at, most of these accidents occur during the middle of the afternoon, between noon and 6 p.m., with probably the highest number in that 3 to 5 p.m. time frame. And that's common, really common for farm equipment. It's also common for just general traffic. So if there's going to be an accident, most likely it's going to be in that 1 to 6 p.m. time frame.
As we're talking about agricultural equipment, what are some examples of what you're talking about when you say ag equipment?
Well, what we've been looking at is most of it is something pulled by a tractor, a sprayer, a combine. Those are the things that we're defining as pieces of ag equipment. We wanted to kind of look at the farm semis that are hauling grain or cattle, but that turns out to be a whole different area, and so we've kind of stayed away from that. The truth of the matter is particular semis, used for farm use trucks, traveling down roads, they're turning in places that a lot of drivers are not expecting them to, and so they fall into some of the same traps as what we're finding with the ag equipment. So you can kind of, as I'm talking about farm equipment, you want to keep those semis and farm trucks hauling grain or cattle in mind as well, because some of those collisions that are happening to the farm equipment probably are happening to the other trucks.
What data have you been looking at?
So we started out, and many of you may remember I was here having this conversation. Many of your listeners may remember us having this conversation last fall. I did an academic search of papers and such, and had some of this data that I'm talking about. But since that conversation, we've pulled crash data from the Kansas Highway Patrol, and we've been going through and looking at the crashes between farm equipment and vehicles. Basically any vehicle that has had a collision with a piece of farm equipment in the last 10 years is what we've been looking at. We've also looked at incidents where there was collisions between farm equipment and fixed objects such as power poles, bridges, and other things. But that's where we've been looking. And what we found is there's really 5 types of incidents that we've been looking at. There have been rear-end collisions, left turn collisions, fixed object collisions, side swipes, and then intersections. These are the top 5 in order. We were kind of surprised as we were doing our work. We thought the rear-end collisions would be second most common. We thought left-hand turns where somebody's driving down the road and pulling into a field or turning onto a county road or something like that. But it turns out that the rear-end collision is the most common type of crash between a personal vehicle and a piece of ag equipment. Left-hand turns came in second place. And then the third place was the fixed object ones, which kind of surprised us. And at first I was kind of going to neglect that, looking at that. But then we started finding out that some of those accidents tend to be hit and runs, where the power company turns in that they've got a broken pole because of somebody hitting it, or the case of a bridge banister or a bridge being harmed by a piece of agricultural equipment. And over the last 10 years from our study, we can see that there were 6 bridges in Kansas that needed significant repair due to a collision with a piece of ag equipment.
And you mentioned hitting potentially some power poles, and does that sometimes accidentally create more safety concerns?
Yes, it does. Of the incidents where the piece of ag equipment hit a power pole, 48% of the time there were down power lines that the tractor or machine, whatever that piece of ag equipment, came in contact with power poles. And so there was no discussion of how big of a power outage or anything like that. It's certainly for whoever's driving a piece of ag equipment, if they knock over a power line, that's a clear and immediate threat to them. So very significant safety issue right there.
Ed, you've mentioned left-hand turns, but were there ever any accidents on right-hand turns?
Oh, yeah. That was the most surprising piece, that there was, in the last 10 years, been 2 incidences where there was a right-hand turn where somebody was either taking up the whole road in preparation to turn right, or it swung out to turn right, and someone attempted to pass the vehicle, the piece of ag equipment on the right side, and of course was then hit. And that was one of the more surprising things that we found, was that even incidents of turning right, you can have a right-hand incident.
And you noted that most of the accidents with ag equipment and passenger vehicles happen between May and October. However, in the past few weeks, there have been some pretty notable stories of unfortunate accidents. Yeah,
there's 2 of them that have caught my eye. They happened within a day of each other, and they all happened roughly 2 weeks ago. There was a woman in North Dakota that collided with a farm tractor pulling a land roller. Not quite sure what happened there, but the woman was killed in the accident. And then in northwest Iowa, and many of you that are in eastern Kansas may have seen this on some of the media, there was an incident in northwest Iowa where a man driving a John Deere tractor ran a stop sign and collided with a van, and there's 2 deaths reported in that accident. And what really made that accident bad was the driver of the tractor drove away from the scene, and so it was a hit and run. And that's kind of disappointing that not only did the individual cause an accident, they left the scene too.
So, Ed, as we're thinking about ag equipment, what are your thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Following along with this crash in northwest Iowa, we really need to understand that if we're driving agricultural equipment on the road, we need to pay attention to the stop signs and follow the rules of the road that we've learned in driver's ed and such. I mean, they apply to us. If you run a stop sign in your tractor in front of a highway patrolman, more than likely he's going to pull you over and you're going to get a ticket for it. And yes, you do have a load that you're trying to deal with, and there's a lot that goes into it, and we understand that, but understand that you do have to follow the rules of the road. And this incident in northwest Iowa is a prime example of why, is because bad things happen when you don't follow the rules of the road. The other thing is that I think you need to practice defensive driving, and that's an area that I kind of would like to explore in greater detail as to what defensive driving looks like for farmers and producers driving their equipment on the road. And I will hope to someday in the future have some good suggestions on that one. But I think the other thing is that as farmers need to make sure that their equipment is visible when they're on the road. Obviously, a large percentage of rear-end crashes don't fully understand why those occur. But if you don't have all the safety equipment on the back of your machine, then you don't have a chance of being seen. If you have the lights, the reflectors, the SMV, and all the stuff that is provided with modern ag equipment. And I wear a hat that I am involved with the lighting and marketing equipment on highways. Modern farm equipment has a lot of marking and lights, reflectors, and such to be visible as you're driving down the road. So it's there, just you have to maintain it and keep it working. And so if you've got that, then you've got a chance of being seen. And if you've got that chance of being seen, you have a really good chance of not being hit.
Ed, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for letting me come.
That was Kansas State University Assistant Professor in the Department of Agricultural and Biological Engineering, Ed Brokesh, discussing ag equipment safety on the road. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking with the 2025 Alumni Fellow for the College of Veterinary Medicine, Dr. Ron Marler. Ron, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Ron, you came to K-State not only for your bachelor's, but also to get your doctorate of veterinary medicine. And what brought you to K-State?
It was veterinary medicine. I had an experience with Dr. Luke Benaway, who was a practitioner in Topeka, Kansas, where I was living at the time. And he hired me for one summer in 1966, and I got enthralled with veterinary medicine. And obviously, Kansas State was the school in the state of Kansas for veterinary medicine. You may ask why Kansas State, because there were a lot of veterinary schools at the time. I think most of us who grew up in the state of Kansas kind of felt like the world ended at the eastern border of the state of Kansas. And so we stayed at home. Kansas State was obviously a good choice.
So with your time working in that veterinary clinic, what really drawed you into veterinary medicine?
I don't know that it was so much something that I did at the clinic as just the excitement about veterinary medicine and certainly what I read. So not per se the clinic, because it was primarily working in the kennels and taking care of the animals. But he did allow me to help out in surgery. So that was kind of exciting to do that.
What was your time like here at Kansas State University going to school?
I was in a fraternity, Beta Theta Pi, Beta House, here on campus. So that was exciting. And then early on in my career, I was an EMT for Riley County Emergency Services in the late 60s and 70s. And I was telling the lecturer that we had before, I still drive around Manhattan and see sites of calls I went on to 50 years ago and can remember them very vividly. But those were kind of my initial memories of Kansas State.
And you were part of the class of 1973 from K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine. However, after you graduated, you joined the U.S. Army Veterinary Corps. And what was that like?
Well, for those of us who are of that age, there were very few people who joined. There were lots of people who were asked to join. And I was one of them. I had a very low draft number. And we were allowed to come on as reserve officers and allowed to finish our education. But once our education was finished, then you were commissioned immediately into the military. And so I was commissioned as a captain in the military and was stationed at Fort Riley.
What did you do during your time?
At Fort Riley?
Yeah.
Well, I jokingly say that I protected the state of Kansas from foreign adversaries. And the good news is we weren't invaded. And I also usually put in there that was without me ever being issued a weapon. But in seriousness, I had a herd of buffalo who were probably the commanding general's pets. We had one sentry dog, and we had in charge of the commissary. So that was my assignment for roughly 2 years.
And after that, you came back to K-State and did some more schooling. And yes. What did you choose to get a PhD in? I
got my PhD in veterinary pathology. I got interested in pathology by working with a pathologist at Irwin Army Hospital at Fort Riley. He would allow me to come over and look at pathology slides, histopathology slides. And that's how my interest in pathology started. And then I took a look around, and again, I guess being reticent to move outside the state of Kansas, I thought, well, Kansas State has a program in veterinary pathology. I'll go take a look there. And Jim Cook was gracious enough to take me on as a graduate student. And you finished that in 1978. And where'd you go afterwards? I went to a company called Mead Johnson, which was a part of Bristol Myers Squibb. And I was hired as a bench pathologist to look at histopathology. What is a bench pathologist? A bench pathologist sits behind a microscope 8 hours out of the day and reads microscope slides. And you continued working in pharmaceuticals. Where'd you go after Mead Johnson? I decided that I wanted to do something more than just to look at slides. So I went with, at the time, it was called Dow Pharmaceuticals in Indianapolis. And I got more involved in overall study design of toxicology studies. I subsequently decided that I wanted to get more involved in drug development. So I did the work necessary to become more experienced in drug development, eventually becoming vice president of global toxicology for one of the predecessors to Sanofi Adventis. And K-State pulled you back, and you became the dean of K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine in 1994. And why'd you come back to Kansas? I think a better question is, why did I leave? But we'll get to that in a minute. You know, I think in a sense it was a huge honor. I mean, as a general rule, deans are not taken out of industry. To become an academic dean, you generally work up through an academic administration. And George Kennedy, who was a good friend of mine, called me and asked me if I'd be interested. And I thought, I'd like to interview just because I come from a different background, and I think I can come with a different perspective on academia. And so I thought, well, I'll apply, but I was under no illusion that they were going to pick me because you have to consider yourself as kind of the dark horse candidate. Lo and behold, they offered the job to me, and then I had to make a decision, and I did take it. It was a great 3.5 years, but as I was talking to the group today, academic administrators are primarily consensus builders. People from industry are not consensus builders. You're paid to be visionary, you're paid to make decisions, and they better be the right decisions. That other people like or dislike the decision is not high on your priority list. That's not true in academic management. You have to build consensus to try to get things through. It was apparent to me that my management style in particular was probably not suited to be dean, because I wanted to get some things done very quickly. And it was probably better for the faculty in general to have a dean that did more consensus building. So went back into industry, and what did you do when you did that? So I took over successive corporate management positions at Covance Laboratories, and ultimately became vice president of global toxicology for Covance. I then came out to Arizona. We were looking at putting in a facility to handle our East Coast clients in Arizona. And one of the meetings we had was with management at Mayo Clinic, and I was approached by their management with a request of would I consider joining Mayo Clinic. And I had to think hard about it, but I took the job at Mayo Clinic, and that's kind of how my career started at Mayo Clinic. Did you ever think you'd end up where you did with your degree in veterinary medicine? If you put my resume on one side of the ledger and my classmates' names on the other side, you would have never matched my name with the resume. So it was a complete disconnect. Would you do it all again? I think in essence, because one of my assignments was teaching trauma medicine at Mayo Clinic as part of a team, I've always felt that I was a frustrated ER physician. and especially a trauma physician. And it's not something I will ever do, but if I had to do it again, I might seriously give that some thought.
Interesting. And so after you retired, you kind of did some consulting. And what did that entail?
Well, it basically was similar to what I was doing in industry, except I was being paid directly. So it was consulting with companies across the globe in their development programs. And that's how I started my consulting business.
For people who are interested in veterinary medicine, what do you recommend to them?
Well, the biggest thing I think most veterinary students in general, but students in general, if I had my way, they'd all take business courses. Regardless of what your background is and what you think you want to do, if you want to be successful in life, it's either your personal finances or more globally, the finances of the group that you're working in. But I think if I were to recommend people, you ought to have at bare minimum a course in basic finance.
And as you mentioned, the career path you took, not something you expected of yourself. So for people who are maybe just graduating, what do you want to tell them?
Good luck. No, I would say you just have to follow the opportunities. I would have never sit there and said these are the opportunities. When I was at Mayo, I was approached by Tony Sun from Aisling Capital to become the CEO and on the board of directors of a company. And I had to think hard about that. Would I leave Mayo and do it? And as it turned out, I negotiated an arrangement with Mayo Clinic where I was an executive on loan, and Mayo Clinic got paid the cash and stock remuneration for my activity with the company. Subsequently, I helped sell the company to another friend of mine who happened to be the CEO of a laboratory in Beijing, China. And so I sold the company, helped sell the company to him, and sat on the board of directors for that company. And then later on in my career at Mayo, I was approached by Tony Frank, who is the chancellor for the Colorado University system, and he asked me if I would sit on the Colorado State Ventures board. And I sat on that board for several years. And so it's, as I lectured today, it's not necessarily what you know, it's who you know that counts.
Ron, what are you up to now?
I have a consulting business with my cat. My cat moves around, slides around the microscope. And so it's I do as much as I want to do. I could do more. I could do less. So I just do what I want to do. But I have a consulting business.
That was the 2025 Alumni Fellow for the College of Veterinary Medicine, Dr. Ron Marler. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. Spring is a great time for tree care in Kansas, focusing primarily on pruning and general maintenance. This week, K-State instructor and horticulture extension specialist Cynthia Domenghini covers how to evaluate storm-damaged trees and why it's important to remove suckers. Cynthia, good time to talk about tree care, and one of the things that we often don't think about is taking care of the suckers on the tree.
Right. Sometimes we'll see trees, and certain varieties will do this more than others, but they'll send up some growth from the ground, and it's coming off of the roots typically, and it's an indicator that the tree is under stress, or at least sometimes it's an indicator that the tree is under stress, and it's sending up additional growth to try to continue to survive.
And what do? We just need to nip those off?
Sure, yeah. Take your sharpened, clean pruners and cut those suckers off at the base. You definitely don't want to use herbicides on them because that could damage the rest of the tree. But then beyond that, once you've removed the suckers, you also want to take into consideration what is the tree telling you. So is it under stress? Is it getting enough water? Is it damaged by something? Are there pests? Take a good look at the tree and find out if there is more of a problem that is promoting that sucker growth. But like I said, some varieties are just more susceptible to sending up suckers, and that may just be something that you deal with during this time of year when the trees are actively growing.
And they'll steal energy from the tree.
Exactly, yes. We don't want the suckers to continue to grow because not only are they unattractive, but they also are taking away the energy, taking water that the roots are pulling in. They are sapping that away from the rest of the tree that you do want to grow.
Another big problem we see, especially this time of year, storm damage. Some things we can do ahead of time to maybe prevent some of the storm damage, and some of it is just what do we do after storm damage?
Right. We always recommend proper tree care year-round. That includes pruning your trees based on what type of tree it is, when you should be pruning it, keeping it with a healthy, strong form so that it's not as susceptible to damage from storms. Also choosing trees wisely. You probably are hearing a lot about calorie pear trees, and that's because of their susceptibility to breakage during storms and just in general. So choosing trees that are appropriate for your area is a really important starting point. But sometimes the storms happen, you've taken care of your tree, and branches are going to break. So you need to start off by doing an evaluation of, is this tree going to recover even if I do prune out that damaged area? And so if the branch breaks off and you are going to cut it off, are you going to be happy with the way the remainder of that tree looks? If you're not going to like the look of it, it may make sense to go ahead and remove the tree and find an appropriate substitute. Another consideration is if you remove that broken branch, is the remainder of the tree safe? So if it's leaning towards one side, if it's real lopsided, if the damage is so deep that the remaining branches are very susceptible to also breakage with even a slight wind, then you may be creating a hazard for your family or your car, your home. And so those are all considerations that you need to think about when you're deciding whether or not to save the remaining tree.
And sometimes we need a professional to really give us an honest opinion.
I always recommend that. I do get lots of questions where people will send in pictures of their tree and asking me, can I save this tree? Sometimes I can tell from a picture, but it is hard to know for sure. And if you are questioning it at all, bring a professional out and have them tell you. Or just choose to replace the tree if you don't want to pay a professional. It's always better to be safe.
That's Cynthia Domenghini, a K-State instructor and horticulture extension specialist with information on caring for trees this spring. Next week, Cynthia discusses mulching around young trees and best practices for watering trees in the home landscape. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.